Do you believe a 4-year-old child can see Jesus? Not in a dream, not in some imaginative story, but truly see him after dying. My son Landon once said something to me that still gives me chills to this day. Dad, Jesus has markers. I chuckled at first. I thought he was talking about colored markers or maybe one of his toys. But then he stood up, his eyes unusually serious. He pointed with his tiny finger to the center of his palm. Then he bent down and gently touched the tops of his feet. Finally, he looked up at me, as if recalling something sacred. Right here, Dad. That's where Jesus has markers. I was speechless. My son had never seen a crucifix. He had never been taught about the nail marks of Jesus. He was only 4 years old. Who could have told him that? And how could he remember such precise details? Have you ever wondered if heaven is real? What truly happens when we cross that line? Will we see our loved ones again? Or is it possible that we might meet the very one who created us? The story I'm about to share is not a dream, and it's not a second-hand miracle. It's the testimony of a small child, a testimony that made the world stop and listen, and that brought me, a pastor, to my knees all over again, as if I were discovering God for the very first time. And it all started with what seemed like a harmless stomach ache. But that pain was just the tip of the iceberg. You won't believe what happened next, when that little boy was taken into surgery and left his body behind. Landon Walker, 4 years old. His hair was golden and soft like an angel's, his eyes as clear and blue as a spring well. He never walked, he ran. He never whispered, he laughed out loud. To Landon, the world was a playground. And family? Family was the whole universe. We lived in Nebraska, where cornfields stretched endlessly toward the horizon, where you could almost smell summer even in the dead of winter. I'm Jonathan Walker, a pastor at a small-town church. My wife, Rebecca, is a gentle yet remarkably strong woman. She once endured the quiet, unspoken grief of losing a child, a pain she never put into words. We loved our son. We loved our faith. And we loved this life. We weren't wealthy, but our home was always filled with laughter. Landon was our long-awaited gift, a child we thought we'd never have. He came after years of praying, after a high-risk pregnancy, after a dream that had once shattered and nearly stayed broken. We called him our little miracle. He loved running around the church, playing hide-and-seek between the old wooden pews, and every night he begged me to tell the story about Mr. Noah and the big, big boat. He believed in every word I preached, and sometimes, faster than I could believe them myself. But I carried a secret, something I never spoke from the pulpit. My faith, at times, had grown tired. After we lost that first baby, Rebecca spent a week in bed, crying without end. I tried to be strong, but inside I had asked God, if you love us, why would you take that child away? I kept preaching about hope, but truthfully, I couldn't feel it anymore. Not until Landon came into our lives. I thought everything was fine. Until that day. A day that seemed perfectly normal. The sky was still clear. Landon was still smiling. Until he clutched his belly, grimaced, and whispered, "Dad, it hurts so much." It was a stomach pain that wouldn't stop. A sleepless night. And a 2 a.m. emergency call. The doctors diagnosed it. Acute appendicitis, likely to rupture. He needed surgery immediately. I held Rebecca's hand in the hospital hallway. For the first time in years, I had no prayer left inside me. Only one question. The same question millions have asked in desperation. Please, don't take this child too. But sometimes, to give you a miracle, God has to lead you through fear, through suffering, even through death, just so you can see life more clearly than ever before. And Landon was about to witness something even most adults wouldn't dare believe is real. The hospital that night felt like a cold, empty cathedral echoing only with hurried footsteps and the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors, as if to remind us just how fragile life is, more delicate than breath itself. Landon was wheeled into the emergency room, his face twisted in pain, his lips turning blue. I bent down and kissed his forehead. "You'll be okay, son. I'm right here." But what I didn't realize was that those words weren't for Landon. They were for me. The doctors moved quickly. The appendix had already ruptured. Infection was spreading rapidly through his abdomen. They had to operate immediately, any delay, or we could lose him. Rebecca sat frozen like a statue. Her hands clenched so tightly they turned white. I had never seen her like that before. Silent, shattered, and I wasn't much better. As a pastor, I had stood at countless hospital bedsides, prayed over sick children, and whispered words of comfort to grieving families. But now, with my little boy teetering between life and death, I had nothing left to say to God. Just a silence that felt more terrifying than any curse ever could. The surgery began. Time dripped by like water in a desert. Every minute felt like a lifetime. I paced, sat down, stood back up. 2 hours passed. Then 3. And finally, the doors swung open. The surgeon stepped out, his mask still stained with streaks of blood. He didn't speak right away. He exhaled heavily first, then looked me straight in the eye. "There was a moment," he said, "when we thought we lost him." His heart stopped for almost 2 minutes. But then it started beating again. We can't explain it. No medication was given at that time. No action was taken in that instant. It just came back. I collapsed to my knees, not out of relief, but confusion. 2 minutes. For me, those 2 minutes were hell. But what were they for Landon? Rebecca broke down, this time not in quiet tears, but in a flood of emotion, like a dam bursting open. She clung to me as if both of us had been pulled from the grave. But what we didn't know was this. In those 2 minutes when Landon's heart stopped, he went further than any of us could have imagined. Further than the operating room. Further than the hospital. Beyond the edge of life itself. In that moment when it seemed like he no longer existed, Landon began a journey one no map could trace, no science could explain. A journey that would change him forever. Because when Landon opened his eyes, the first thing he said wasn't "it hurts," or "where are Mom and Dad?" He looked up and said, "I saw Jesus." And that was just the beginning of a story that would leave the world speechless. I'll never forget that morning. The sunlight spilled through the hospital window like a gentle promise. Rebecca was asleep, slumped beside Landon's bed, her hands still wrapped around his. And I just sat there in silence, watching my son breathe again. It felt like a miracle, like something that didn't quite belong to this world. Suddenly, Landon opened his eyes. There was no confusion, no fear. His gaze was brighter than usual, as if something inside him had just been lit. He looked at me and whispered in a calm, steady voice, "I saw Jesus." I smiled, thinking maybe he was still dreaming, still drifting in that fevered haze. But then he continued, without me asking a thing. Jesus was wearing white robes, with a purple sash across his shoulder. He came down gently, like he wasn't even touching the ground. He raised his arms, mimicking an angel descending. "Jesus has marks," he added. I frowned. "What kind of marks, son?" Landon stood up from the bed, his legs still weak, but his eyes steady, as if he were leading me somewhere I'd never been. He held out his hand and pointed to his palm. Then he bent down and touched the top of his foot. "Right here, Dad. That's where Jesus has markers." I froze. I had never taught my son about the crucifixion. We didn't have any images of Jesus on the cross in our home. Our church was a gentle branch of the Protestant faith, no statues, no blood, no graphic depictions. Landon was far too young to understand what suffering on a cross even meant. But the look in his eyes, I couldn't doubt it. I asked, "What else did you see there?" Landon tilted his head, as if trying to recall every detail. "It was bright, brighter than sunlight, but it didn't hurt your eyes. There were colors we don't have here. They sparkled, the color of life. I played with lions. They were gentle. Some people were painting, others were flying. There was a lot of music, but not like ours. You don't hear it with your ears. You hear it in your heart." I didn't dare breathe. Then Landon continued. "A little girl ran up to me and hugged me. She said, 'I'm your sister. I died in Mommy's tummy, but I'm okay now.'" I turned and looked at Rebecca. She was awake and staring at our son with eyes wide open, like lightning had just struck through her chest. "Are you sure?" I asked. Landon nodded. "She was really pretty, had golden hair like Mom. She said she wasn't sad, and she loves playing with the little angels." Rebecca covered her face and broke down in tears. Deep, choking sobs she could no longer hold back. Because that was something no one had ever told Landon. It was our secret. A pregnancy that didn't make it. A tiny soul who had never taken a breath. We had buried that sorrow in silence, thinking we'd never speak of it again. And yet, the name that was never spoken had come to life through the words of a child who could not have known. I asked Landon, "Were you sad to leave?" He paused for a moment, then said, "No, because Jesus told me I had to come back. He said, 'Your mommy and daddy need you. You still have something to do.'" And then I fell. Fast. Like someone turned off the light. I used to think I understood faith. I'd preached countless sermons about heaven, about hope, about the life beyond this one. But never had those words felt so real, so alive, so full of sweetness, weight, and light, as they did through the voice of a 4-year-old boy. And from that moment on, I knew I wasn't the same man anymore. But that was only the beginning. Because what Landon was about to share next would make the world stop and ask the question, are we living without even knowing what waits just beyond death? In the days following the surgery, Landon recovered with a speed that felt almost unreal. But it wasn't just his body that healed, it was as if he'd been born all over again. There was no panic, no confusion, no frantic questions like most children ask after surviving a near-death experience. Instead, Landon spoke of what he had seen with an almost unsettling calmness. As if heaven was just a place he had visited after school, nothing more. The story didn't end with Jesus or the smiling lions. Each day, Landon added another piece to the puzzle. One day he told me, "Daddy, there's no darkness there. Nobody's ever sad." Another time he said, "I saw your grandpa. He doesn't need a cane anymore. He runs faster than I." I stood frozen. Landon had never met my grandfather. I didn't have a single photo of him to show. But Landon described him in detail, from his old brown shoes to the way he used to tilt his head when he smiled. Exactly right. Rebecca still wasn't saying much. But I noticed her spending more time alone, holding a Bible she hadn't opened in years. One day, I walked in and saw her wiping away tears, whispering, "She's still out there. Still waiting for us." I didn't have to ask who she meant. Landon's story began to ripple outward from our family like a stone dropped into still water. It started with his grandmother, then spread to members of our church, and even to people who didn't believe in God, but found themselves captivated by the pure, unfiltered voice of a 4-year-old boy. And everyone asked the same question. How could a child know all of this? Landon never tried to convince anyone. He simply told his story. When someone doubted him, he didn't argue. He just smiled and said, "I'm only telling what I saw. If they don't believe me, Jesus still loves them anyway." I remember one evening, sitting beside Landon's bed, I asked him, "Were you scared when you died?" He shook his head. "No, because Jesus held my hand. He said I was his beloved son." I looked down, overcome. I had spent my whole life preaching about unconditional love, but it wasn't until that moment that I truly understood. This was a love big enough to hold a child through death itself. We began writing down Landon's words. Not to publish a book, not for fame, just to remember, so that if one day he forgot, we would still have these pages like signs from heaven that what he saw had truly happened. But what we didn't realize was this: the more we wrote, the more Landon remembered. He recalled scenes, conversations, even souls he had encountered. And among them were things no one expected. Because when Landon began to speak about what was coming, about future events, technologies, signs, and changes in the world, even I, a man of lifelong faith, had to hold my breath. Was this child only given a glimpse of heaven, or had he seen something more? Something waiting just ahead for all of us? We thought the story would stay within the circle of our family, just a small, sacred miracle meant for us alone. But the truth had other plans. Word spread like wind over the open fields. A little boy said he saw Jesus. A child spoke of heaven, described loved ones who had passed, and recalled details no one had ever taught him. Those stories began to echo through our church, then onto social media, then into the pages of the local newspaper. And within just a few weeks, the name Landon Walker became a subject of debate across the country. Some believed. Some wept when they heard his words. Some called it rare, precious evidence of life after death. But others mocked it. What does a 4-year-old know? Made up for attention? A clever hoax by the pastor's family? As the light spread, the shadows followed closely behind. The media began calling. They wanted interviews, television spots, tough questions aimed at picking the story apart. They brought in theologians, scientists, and doctors to analyze every word Landon had said. They claimed there was no proof the boy had left his body. Just a near-death hallucination, they said. A chemical storm in the brain on the brink of shutdown. But those of us who were there, we knew different. I looked at Landon and saw that he wasn't worried. He still sat there coloring. Still building little block towers. Still occasionally asking me things like, "Daddy, is Jesus mad at people when they don't believe in him?" I swallowed hard. "No, son. He's sad. But he's never mad." Landon nodded thoughtfully. "I thought so. Because he loves them. People can doubt what I say. They can question me, my wife, and our intentions. But when I look into the eyes of my son-child who speaks of heaven with the same innocence he uses to talk about the backyard, I know I don't need to argue. The truth doesn't need to be defended. It only needs to be told as it is. But what unsettled people the most wasn't just what Landon saw, it was why he saw it. Why him? Why was a 4-year-old boy chosen to witness something most of us can't even begin to imagine? And who or what sent him back? The answer waits at the end, where every loop closes and every question finally meets its revelation. I used to believe I understood faith. I was a pastor. I preached the word. I read scripture daily. I thought that with a sharp mind and strong belief, I could lead others closer to God. But in the end, it was a 4-year-old child, my son, who led me back to the very path I had preached, yet somehow forgotten to truly walk. After everything that happened, I no longer question. I no longer search for explanations. What I have now is a gratitude too deep for words. Because God didn't just save my son's life, He rescued my soul. One evening, as I was tucking Landon into bed, he turned to me and asked a question so simple, it stopped my breath. "Daddy, why did I get to come back? Lots of people die and don't." I didn't know what to say. I looked at this child, this little soul who had gone where most adults can only vaguely call the other side, and I felt smaller than I ever had. I answered slowly, Maybe because you have something to tell. A testimony. A sign." Landon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Then I'll keep telling it, until no one is afraid of dying anymore." I held him in my arms and knew I was holding a messenger. Not because he spoke lofty things, but because he told the truth, with eyes untouched by the world. This story isn't for those chasing flashy miracles. It's for the ones who lie awake at night, quietly asking, "Is there anything beyond this?" It's for the mothers who've lost children, for the fathers who've lost their faith, for the children who've lost hope. And maybe, just maybe, it's also for you. And if you ask me what moment made me truly believe, deeply believe, it wasn't when Landon described heaven. It wasn't when he talked about my grandfather. It was that very first moment when he whispered, "Jesus as markers." Just 4 simple words, yet within them lives the entire mystery of the greatest love humanity has ever known. Markers weren't crayons. They were nail marks. Marks of blood. Marks of sacrifice. They were proof that heaven isn't some far-off place. It's a promise kept. If you're watching this video and still feel unsure, I don't blame you. I used to be the same. But listen to the voice of a child. Jesus loves you even if you don't believe. That is a truth that needs no proof. It only needs to reach the right heart at the right time. And if this is that time, then I pray you don't just hear it. I pray you remember it. Are you ready to live as if heaven is real? Are you ready to release fear, to forgive, to love again because you know that one day you will be reunited in a place where there are no tears, no darkness, and no end? Because my son went there, and he came back with one message just for you. Jesus is waiting for you, and he has markers. Jesus has markers. Not a child's naive words, but a testimony, a message from heaven, a truth wrapped in the voice of a 4-year-old boy. If this video stirred something in you, don't let it slip away. Start over, live as if you've heard about heaven from someone who has been there. Because maybe, you just did.